Tej, welcome to the MBA Success Stories video interview. I'm glad you've joined me in helping other Indians who are trying to pursue an MBA, possibly from the best business school in India, if I may say so. And let's help them actually navigate the journey of how to get to IIM, how you got to IIM IIM Ahmedabad for everybody listening, what your journey has been so far within the first year, and how you're going to go through the next year as well. And welcome.
Sure, Ashwin. Thanks for having me.
Cool, man. Let's actually go back. So you and I worked in the career cohort together. You were, in my opinion, after I met with many people, one of the rising stars. We knew you were going to be successful, right? So here's for foreshadowing the greatness. However, let's talk about where you were before you got into IIMA, and let's put yourself in the mindset of the person thinking about whether to pursue an MBA or not. Talk to me about what you were doing before your MBA and what your mindset was when you were considering applying for an MBA.
Sure. So my background is that I majored in chemical engineering from IIT Madras. And then I worked not in a field not very related to my major. I worked at Axis Bank as a business analyst. So it was a very my role was a very semi-technical, semi-functional role. It involved a good amount of coding. It involved a good amount of talking to the business teams. My job essentially was a placeholder in my career, the way I saw it, when I took up the job at least. When I took up the job, it was mostly because I was very confused. I joined IIT thinking I would do a PhD in some engineering-related field, and I would become a professor in the US. That was my goal in life at 17.
Academic
and
goals,
then that
good.
goal, yes. And then look where I am. But still, around when I was 19 or 20, I got very interested in other things. I thought I would do civil services. And that's what I wanted to do in my final year of college. And then I realized it was based on one internship. I realized I'm too opinionated to be a civil servant who has to implement all sorts of policies. But it's just a hobby that I have even now to comment on everything the government is doing. But that's a different story, right? So essentially, when I took up the Axis Bank job, it was a placeholder. I was confused on what to do. So I thought, well, I'll just figure things out by taking up this job. I had an offer from IIM Calcutta when I took up the job. But again, MBA is likely the last academic degree I'll ever take up in campus, unless I choose to go for an executive MBA. So I wanted to be a little bit more clear of what I wanted to do. The IIT decision was essentially, well, I want to be successful. IIT is a good place to be successful. People from IIT are generally successful, so let me go there. That's all the thought process was at 17. I didn't want that to be the case for MBA. So I just thought I'll take up a couple of years to figure things out and then decide what to do. And this was the offer I had from campus, from IIT. I interned at Axis Bank.
But I do want to mention one thing. While you said that you had almost a stopgap role while you were considering what you want to do, the nature of the work you were doing at Axis Bank was somewhat strategic, even if it were analytical and required your technical skills. Just speak very briefly about what you were doing at Axis Bank.
Sure. So my team, we called ourselves the product valuations team. So based on our analysis of past data of retail lending, I work majorly on retail. Towards the end of my stint, I started working on business lending as well, but mostly on the lending side of the bank. So I would go to the lending heads of different verticals, the personal loan folks, the home loan folks, etc. And I would try to come up with insights on who to lend to. Do you want to lend to existing savings account customers, or do you want to lend to customers who are not your savings customers? Just go fight out in the open market to gain them. Are there any specific regions where the credit risk is so high that the entire interest margin is not even covering that up? So the strategic part of the role was when we tried to convince the business leaders within the company to change tracks. I would say strike rate for me was, I guess, 1 on 10 or 2 or 10. 10 insights I give, one of them gets adopted. Because some of them are just mandates given by the top management, which even they couldn't change if they wanted to. That was the strategic part. But again, for every one, I'll spend 1 week in coding and number crunching part to come up with 1 hour of presentation the next week, and that's an optimistic estimate. Sometimes it goes to 2 or 3 as well.
So it's not unlike strategy consulting, to be perfectly honest. Of many of the projects that I've done, whether it's at McKinsey or elsewhere, a lot of it is providing recommendations where, well, I'd say 20% of them actually get implemented. So it's all right. You were right there in the strike rate zone, so I wouldn't feel too bad about that. Okay, so you worked for nearly 2 years at Axis prior
Exactly
to
2 years.
right.
24 months. Yeah.
Talk about what prompted you to actually then reconsider the path to MBA after you've spent 2 years at Axis.
Sure. So everything started. I guess the first year I was just settling into the job, right? First 9 to 12 months, and 15 months into the job, I was liking it. But again, I was sort of bummed with my first year performance reviews. So I think we spoke about that as well.
We have,
That was going on, but that was not exactly the cost to choose MBA. At the back of my mind, I always knew that I would either take up a professional course. I was mostly MBA was always at the back of my mind.
Yep.
You can blame it on my background. I like any IIT person who doesn't do MS has MBA at the back of his or her mind.
That's right.
So especially from IIMs, but there is a new trend for the last 4 or 5 years for extremely good candidates who get one of the glamorous jobs to consider foreign MBAs. It's a new trend that's forming at IITs, but for someone from my background, thinking about IIMs was very natural. Like the fact that I had an IIM Kolkata offer, I was sure I wouldn't take up an MBA, but writing CAT it's just something you do. It's almost like another semester examination you give. So it's, but about MBA especially my thought process was when I wrote CAT, I did not want to do MBA that in this year. I thought I will do an MBA with 3 years of work ex if I do it at IIM. I wasn't particularly prepared. People actually prepare for months for CAT.
Yep.
At the risk of sounding like I'm bragging, I did not have to prepare a lot. I lucked out on certain aspects. We'll talk about that. But then, well, the decision between IIM and a foreign MBA, like in the West, right, is not only separated by geographies, it's also separated by time.
Yep.
An IIM MBA makes sense when you're 2 or 3 years into your work ex. As a fresher, it makes some sense, and as a maybe up to 3 years of work experience, it makes sense. But once you hit that 3+ mark, it starts making lesser sense for you because the way the roles are. There are lateral placements where you do get where experienced folks also get like mid-management roles directly. But if you look at most of your consulting and banking jobs, your ROI is great at 2 to 3 years of work ex. But then you start thinking about an MBA in the West only after that. Right. So that way, it's also a question of where and when. And to be honest, after I wrote CAT, I thought I flunked it. I did not. There's this process where you can get your answer sheet in 2 weeks or 3 weeks after CAT, and then their solutions are published. You can check your scores and have a reasonable expectation of where you would lie, which calls you can expect. There's an entire coaching industry built around this. I did not do any of that because I thought I flunked it. So what was the point, right? But it so happened that when the message came that my personnel is pretty cool and I can expect when my personnel came, it was at 99.84 or something. So I knew I could expect a call from at least Kolkata. But you getting an interview call from, I'll just call them ABC: A for Ahmedabad, B for Bangalore, C for Kolkata. These are the IIMs. So when you prepare for an IIM, you prepare for IIMs. You don't prepare for a specific IIM. It's mostly the same, the application process. So Kolkata does not have a great weightage for undergrad CGPA, which was my sort of weak point on my profile, if you'd see. Ahmedabad, I thought I had a 50-50 chance. Bangalore, I knew I don't have a shot, and I didn't get an interview call because Bangalore likes folks who have a very nice GPA in undergrad.
Interesting.
Or who have 4 years of work. So
it's not sufficient that you went to IITs and IIT Madras. You need to be exceptionally extremely good scores in order to get even an IMB call. Well, that's good to know. When I wrote, like I said, at 15 months of my job, when I wrote CAT, I was particularly not unhappy with my job. Things were going well. I thought my aim at that point of time was to get promoted the next year and see if I can take up more responsibilities. And maybe after
6 months after that, I'll start looking out. But when I wrote CAT, that was my thought process. I wasn't really looking forward to quit my job. But between the time I wrote CAT and the results, it's a 45-day wait to get your CAT percentile.
So
At that point,
when do you typically write? Unlike GMAT, CAT has certain times that you can write, right, within the year.
it's
Like
November
GMAT,
last
you
week
can.
or December 1st.
Oh, November last week or December first week. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So then you gave your CAT. You thought you didn't do that well. Yet, after how many weeks do the results come out?
Uh, 45 days. So Jan mid, you expect your CAT results by mid Jan.
Okay, so Jan mid, you got to know that you had 99.8 plus percentile, which was pretty good in my opinion. And then how quickly after that do you actually get calls from whether it's IIM, A, B, C, or any other IIMs that you possibly want to go to?
Within 10 days, your scenario gets very clear to you, if I remember right.
How
Within
do
10
the
days, you
IIMs
know where
actually
you.
get to know your undergraduate grades and everything? What's the formal application process like at that point?
Okay, so you enter all of that in your CAT application itself. So
Yeah.
every year, one of the IIM takes a turn to host I wouldn't say host, to organize the CAT exam. So it's a very common process for all the IIMs. So it just rotates around, setting the question paper, collecting the info and everything. In the CAT application form, you give them details about your undergrad scores, 10th and 12th scores. You give them details about your work experience. There's no essay or anything. It's just inputting name, fields, numbers, and it's a very short form, not a very big form. So you apply to CAT when? I think by September you generally finish applying to CAT, and then the exam happens in November or December, last week or first week, depending on the case. You get your results by mid-Jan, the CAT results, and your interviews start happening from mid-Feb, depending on your city and the IIM. So, I mean, before COVID, right, the interviews are always in person, and the panel tours each city. Uh, for South, they generally host it in around 6 or 7 cities, depending on the zone. Calcutta for the East, people from East India. For South, it's Bangalore generally. There's one in Hyderabad. And of course, every IIM has interviews in their own home city. A will
Of
have
course.
interviews in Ahmedabad, B in
Yeah.
Bangalore, so on. The Delhi and Mumbai are always there. They have to be there.
Yeah.
So it goes on like that. Depending on the city and which IIM visits on that day, your interview can be anywhere between mid-Feb to end of March.
Got it. Interestingly, before we go into the actual interview process, and I want for everybody listening to actually understand what the interview was like at IIMA compared to, say, other IIMs based on your knowledge. But before that, you mentioned that the average age of a person and possibly the ROI, especially when getting an IIM or an Indian MBA degree, as I look at the statistics, you're right. The majority actually over 30%, if you look at the stats, come with 1 to 2 years of experience. Not what I had anticipated. I expected that it would be majority just fresh out of college. A close second is just fresh graduates, but in combination of fresh graduates to up to 2 years is greater than 65%.
With Ahmedabad, it's a little bit higher because A is the only IIM to give you a option to defer your MBA. You can, as a fresher, get an admit and defer it for 2 years. So if you want to, your odds of deferring go a little bit lower when you apply with 1 year work experience, but you still have a shot at it. But you can defer your MBA up until you get 24 months, sorry, not years, 24 months of work experience.
Interesting.
So that will see Ahmedabad have a higher, higher number of people in this group of work experience.
Interesting. Incidentally, 2 years ago, a student of mine from the admissions side of the work went into IIM a PGP-X, so your executive
Right.
1 year full-time program. He had over 5 or 6 years of experience, and he went there with a GMAT score. So he's gotten a phenomenal return out of that as well, getting into his dream job as a vice president right after the school. So
That's great.
yeah, so I would say for anybody who's on the senior side, don't be discouraged to apply to Indian schools if you're interested in a career in India, a long-term and significant growth. I have seen that happen out of IIMA as well. IIMA, this is the last marketing piece I'm doing for you. Okay. All right, let's go back to the interview process, dude.
Sure.
Talk to me about the interview experience at IIMA and what some of the highlights were and what you thought you could have done better.
Sure. So, well, yeah. So what I got was, between the time I get my CAT percentile, I thought I grew slightly tired of my job. I wouldn't say tired, but it was becoming monotonous. I was looking for a change. I was actually in the middle of drafting my CV so that I'll start looking out for other opportunities. But then at the right time, I got my CAT score. So I thought, well, I'm looking for a change. This is not a bad change. So why don't I give it a shot? Again, with IIMs, the universe of IIM set is A, B, C, and you have these three are generally stand out because they are the first three IIMs to have been established. They are called the old IIMs. After a while, you have Lucknow, Indore, and Kozhikode, which were also established, and now you have 17 IIMs, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
But my decision at that point of time was that I will, since I didn't have a B call, I will go to A or C. Lucknow and Kozhikode I applied, but I was not very keen on joining. This is just a personal bias because the IIT I went to is known as one of the old IITs, right? Old
among
IITs
the five,
the top five. So right or wrong bias, whatever it was, I did not want to go to a new IIM from an old IIT because it looks like a step down on ICV. So of course, if I get A or C, I would take it. If not, I would continue my search for greener pastures elsewhere. That's what I thought. Well, A and C, the interview process generally for IIMs has 4 pillars if you have work experience. They generally, but not all of them might get tested. The interview process just about anything. The panel can just ask you whatever you want. For Ahmedabad, what happens is you have a form after you get your interview call to be filled, where you again put some numbers here and there, your scores, etc. But there are 2, 3, I wouldn't call them essays, but short answers you write. There is generally one question about your work experience if you have some work experience, about your job, your responsibilities, and there's one question about any insight you derived out of your job. It's a very open-ended question. It could be what you do better if you were in your boss's position. It could be what did you learn, anything. It's a question like that, and a couple of questions about your hobbies, and why MBA is always there. So that forms the base to your interviews. Sometimes I don't personally think these answers are evaluated because they just serve as pointers to the interviewer when they interview you. It's typically a panel of 2 to 3 folks. Sometimes an alumnus can be in the panel, sometimes they are not, but 2 professors are always there in the panel.
Interesting.
So So I gave 4 IIM interviews: 1 Kozhikode, 1 Lucknow, 1 Kolkata, and 1 Ahmedabad. For me, all of them were in person. I was the last batch of students who had offline interviews, after which lockdowns happened. So there was a lot of uncertainty that. So I'm not sure how the online interviews went this time around, how they normalized online to offline. All the plus I'm not sure, but for offline interviews, there are always 4 pillars. One, you want to be very thorough on why MBA. The folks at IIM know that IIMs are more often than not also considered escape routes for people who hate their jobs. A lot of people are running away from their jobs, not going towards an MBA. So,
by the way, it's not just IIMs; it's MBA schools around the world. Okay, and the fearful thing, especially when working with students, is the biggest driver. And if you just dig in a couple of layers, the biggest driver is like, if you really ask them, they'll say that, I don't like what I'm doing now, or I don't like my boss, or I don't like my team, or I don't like my job. Therefore, I want to do an MBA so I can do something else. For everybody listening, while that may be the true driver, that's not something that you want to sell as a selling point of getting into any school around the world.
Right. That's true. So they generally do tend to, if the answer is not convincing, that is your entire interview. Sometimes your interview starts with why MBA, and let's say the answer is not convincing, because with 2 years of work ex, you also have the profile to go for an MS abroad. So a lot of folks say, I want to do finance, that's why I'm here. So they try to play devil's advocate deliberately. But why don't you take up a master's in financial engineering if you just want to do finance? Why do you want an MBA? That's another question. Some folks who have very high CGPA deliberately get questioned on, you have high CGPA in engineering undergrad, why don't you go for MS? And so it helps to have just 1 or 2 reasons that's very convincing. I found some people come up with 4 reasons, and they try to list down as bullet points in the interview.
Mm.
And even if one of them is weak, it gets picked apart.
Mm.
I just had one major reason. I said my job had technical part of it and functional side of it. I had more fun whenever I was talking to the business folks. I wanted to see myself
Transition
there.
to that.
I'm not actually more in the technical part. So that's why I wanted to do MBA. My answer was straightforward, and in none of my 4 interviews, I was cross questioned on why I want on my motivations for MBA.
Mm.
So I think it just helps to have one or two major points on why you want to do it, rather than actually listen on a lot of reasons. So that's one pillar. The other pillar is being updated with whatever is happening, reading news essentially. It doesn't have to be said for a person who's looking to do a business degree, but sometimes people are very busy in their jobs or they're freshers, so they don't really read news. So some of them test current affairs, especially when I was giving my Calcutta interview. That's when the Fed reduced the bank rate by some basis points to as a monetary stimulus of sorts. So do I at least know what an expansionary monetary policy is? Some basic things like that were tested. So you test. It could be anything, honestly.
So
The professor just.
Just to be extremely clear for anybody who's listening, keeping abreast of current affairs or understanding what's happening financially, business-wise, otherwise, does not include knowing who the TikTok influencers are, right? That current affairs is not us. Just so we're clear, right? Have some relevant business grounding and knowledge and understanding. At least keep yourself aware, make yourself worthy of a business school application. Go ahead.
Right. So that's the second pillar, and the third pillar will be the probability of this being tested goes lesser as you have more years of work experience, your undergrad education. So I've found that most of these professors, not most, some of these at least, have if you have panel of 3, chances are you have somebody from all backgrounds. There will be a professor who is on finance, marketing, and somebody might have done even an engineering undergrad and then become a management professor. So considering that most of the applicants are engineers, one of them definitely prepares for basic engineering questions by Googling up something the night before. So if you say you're a chemical engineer, they will ask you, this is just a test that you haven't bullshitted your way through undergrad, which is what most people do. But if you're a fresher, it's very important that you do have at least one area of your major that you like. Generally you are it's very explicit, it's not subtle at all. So they ask you to choose one area of your undergrad education that you
enjoy
either like or feel you're strong at, and then they either Google up at that point of time or they would have prepared the night before. So they have some very basic questions to ask. How would I put it? It's the questions are not very complicated. They are something you will know, that you will have to know if you have done chemical engineering or mechanical or things like that. But of course, you don't have to sit through your entire undergrad syllabus to be prepared for this. You will have plenty of answers on Quora and on the various MBA blogs, where you can get an idea of what kind of questions you can expect based on your undergrad. But again, if the background is economics or a commerce student, the questions can get a little bit more intense because it has more correlation with MBA.
Yeah.
For engineers, it's just basic questions. That I can know. I was asked only in one of my 4 interviews. Calcutta asked me for what's Reynolds number. So that's something you know if you're a chemical engineer. Even if you bullshitted your way through chemical engineering like me.
You probably know.
I hope my undergrad professors are not listening to this. But yeah. That's the third pillar. And the fourth one is about your work experience. This doesn't apply for freshers. So one of these two will apply to you. Fresher, then undergrad syllabus. Or if you are a person with work experience, then you talk about your work, what you did. And the way they ask you about your work experience is not just what you wrote on your CV, right? So it's a little bit about what work you did for them to get a context. And after that, it's about if let's say it was technical, let's say you were doing some sort of modeling, that there can be some questions about modeling. If somebody was a financial analyst, questions about a balance sheet or the technical knowledge can be tested. That's very much based on the domain expertise the person may or may not have. And then there is also an aspect about, do you have an understanding of the sector you are in? I was in a bank, right? So I was expected to understand what the banking industry generally does, what the general trends in the Indian banking sector are. some folks deliberately got asked who is the CEO of your company, and they did not know. So that reflects very poorly on you.
Yeah,
So
that's not good.
right.
That's
So
not good.
that way, or they messed it up because 1 week ago the CEO changed and they named the earlier person. Things
Oh,
like that keep
wow.
happening. So a
Hmm.
very basic understanding of uh, what you do and where does it fit in within the company's overall business, and what is that business, how does that business work from a macro perspective, and who the important people are. I think that's mostly it. Of course, if your job is technical, you also want to understand you also want to brush up on the technical aspects of the job. And more than anything, some in my Ahmedabad interview, I got asked this question where put yourself in your boss's shoes. What will you do differently from what he or she's doing currently now? So
So
yeah,
almost like
that's
a behavioral question based on the pillar of your work experience and relevance to your
yeah,
work experience. Very good.
right.
Was there a specific
Again,
behavioral interview itself that was different from, say, for instance, in global business schools and business school applications you have? Um, Tell me about a time when you faced a challenging situation, or tell me about a time when you met with a difficult team member. Were any of those types of questions ever there in an IIM interview?
in one of my forms, I had to fill this up,
Hmm.
but it wasn't specifically tested. It may get asked. It may be part of your. It may flow through from your YMBA answer.
Hmm.
So they may essentially build up on it, telling you, MBA is very stressful. So have you been exposed to such situations before? It's always a possibility. The most, how do I put it, irritating part of these interviews is that you never know how yours is going to go.
Hmm.
I have had interviews where I got none of these, and it was just a stress interview. My Lucknow interview was a stress interview where the
Just
professor,
give us an instance of what the stressful situation was.
yeah, the stressful situation is plain simple. You easily can make out whether it's a stress interview or not based on how they start your interview.
Hmm.
So whatever you say, they don't let you complete your sentence. They
Hmm.
don't let you make your point. And after you make a point, they say it's a very bad point. Are you sure
Hmm.
you're smart?
Hmm.
They make you feel like you're not smart. So that's how these interviews go. And generally, they start with YMBA, and then especially for someone from my background, IITs are heavily subsidized by taxpayer money.
Hmm.
So the recurrent question is, you're wasting taxpayer money. You are. I mean, why would I? You did not do engineering well. That's why you want to do an MBA. What guarantees do I have that you will do MBA well?
How did you
So they try
tackle
to
that
make a point.
response?
Well, again I related it back to my work experience where I said my motivation to do it is strong,
Hmm.
and it's not like so there. This is very specific to me, right? Their contention that I did not do my undergrad well was based on my CGPA, which was not very bad, but it was not great either. But
Hmm.
then I showed them all the other activities I was doing at
Hmm.
undergrad. So I was part of the placement cell at undergrad. I was part of the lectures team. So I could show instances where I added value to the community of IIT Madras per se. I had
Hmm.
taken up a bunch of leadership roles in these positions. I was also involved in mentoring freshmen and
Hmm.
getting them onboarded into the campus.
Hmm.
So, especially undergrad at IIT, I think most undergrads are not just about getting the CGPA. It's
Hmm.
also about how you grow as a personality, right? So,
Hmm.
my growth was different, and I could easily say that if anybody who goes to IIM is going to probably pay back all the taxpayer money in 2-3 years, if you
Hmm.
just look at the monetary aspect of it. So, the taxpayer money is not a very big argument. You can
Hmm.
easily diffuse it.
Hmm.
And um, about career aspirations, you just have to tell them that you did not flunk undergrad. Your priorities were just different. You may not
Hmm.
have focused on academics, or maybe you did. But then the other side, you just have to make them aware of the trade-off that you took.
Hmm.
And but none of this will matter in a stress interview. In a normal interview, this will matter. In a stress interview, you will not speak for more than 10 words at one point. They will cut you off. So
So,
the only
actually, for people listening, in a stress interview, what would matter is behaviorally how you handle the stress. I suspect. How
yeah
would you recommend people handle the stress when somebody is cutting off a candidate from speaking or dismissing their point as insignificant and and not worthy of a place, essentially what they're trying to do.
Right. So there are only two things. In fact, you should be happy if you get a stress interview, because otherwise you don't know how your interview went. In a stress interview, you either know you did it really well, or you know you didn't. Because the two things to note in an IIM stress interview is you keep smiling throughout whatever they say. You never let the smile go off in your face.
That's
And the other
crazy.
one is you tackle the most recent question. So they unload a barrage of questions at you. Don't go to the first question and start from there. Tackle the most recent question. And if they want you to tackle any other question, they will ask you the same question again. But
Interesting.
most importantly, you just have to keep smiling. I have had two stress interviews. One my Calcutta stress interview in my final year undergrad, and Lucknow this year. This year, as in the last time I took interviews. Both of them, I just did that. It did not matter what I said. If I actually look back at what I said, it's not a great answer. But all I had to do was just keep smiling. So that generally works. And so the important thing is to just realize that you are in a stress interview, and it's not very hard to realize it. Of course, all interviews give you a certain sense of stress and anxiety, but the professor does not smile, the panelist does not smile at you. They try to make statements that make you feel like you're not worthy of it. If you feel that way, it's a stress interview, just smile and tackle the most recent questions.
How long was your IIMA interview?
20 minutes. They
Okay.
rarely go beyond 20-25 minutes.
Okay, cool. After how long did you get to know your results?
Generally, you get to know by April 2nd week. ABC give their results by April 2nd or 3rd week max. But this time it got extended till May 1st week because of lockdowns and them figuring out their processes.
Logistically,
Because
how they can do that. Okay,
yeah.
so then you got the admit. Talk to me about the excitement level when you actually got the admit.
Right. So in a way, weirdly, I was lucky to have the process postponed till May, because I didn't have to quit my job in April. And so I got my promotion in the May 1st week, and I got my IIM admit in the same week. So that was that was a good week despite the lockdowns.
Yeah.
And so, but then I had to. What happens with IIMs is you have a very short notice to join. You generally join within 45 days to 60 days of your result. But most of Indian firms, especially post-engineering, you have a notice period of 60 to 90 days. So you always want to be in good terms with your boss, because there's another reason you have to leave on good terms, because your boss has to approve everything you write about your work in your CV. That will start once your IIM starts. It's a very important process, but you always want to leave on good terms. And the good thing is most people who hire engineers know that IIM is at the back of their mind, and the litmus test is whether they continue with the same organization after 2 years, because 2 years is when people leave. So as long as you don't surprise them with my boss I got lucked out. He was a very nice chap. So in fact, my mentor's wife, she is a cat coacher herself, right? So he was like, he knew exactly the timelines about cat. On the cat day, he messaged me, "How did your cat go? When I got the percentile, what is your percentile? And when are your interviews? How did they go?" So he was
actually
he did not
invested in your success, as opposed to invested in you just being at Access. He was just invested in your success period. And look, you get great bosses like these. That's always a blessing, even in the interim journey. I want to recap one thing for anybody who's still in their undergrad, who's possibly watching this. It's never too late, whether your academics are on the weaker side. Well, focus on your academics, but also use your time wisely to improve some of the leadership elements that you can while you're at the school clubs. Diversify your experience and actually grow as a person. That's one thing that you said. Be wise and smart if you're joining a company, to maintain good relations with people, even if you know your exit is imminent, whether to an MBA program or not, because it always pays good rewards. And see, if you get great scores, and if you're ever encountering a stress interview, besides the 4 pillars that you need to know, handle it with ease and care. Yes?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Of this entire process, and before we go into the journey at IIM itself, what was the toughest part?
Well, I would say the interviews for me, but for a lot of people, it is CAT. So see, CAT preparation is something that's very personal. I would not recommend a one size fits all approach, because if you go to any coaching institute, they'll tell you, this is the formula for you. You do this, you'll crack it. So nobody can follow a very set formula. Although I did not prepare for CAT, what worked for me is that I used to read newspapers and non-fiction books, because of which my reading speed was generally good. I'm not the best at it, but I'm not the worst at it. So all the reading comprehension questions in the verbal part of the exam, I could challenge in the exam is to be fast enough to read it, and I did it with ease. So in a way, if you think you want, I mean, reading is always a good habit. If not books, newspapers. So I would say there's a long way to prepare for it by just reading newspapers and not actually stressing on the material your coaching institute may or may not give you. There is, of course, the preparation has to be very thorough on the other two aspects of the exam. The quant, where they test your speed math, and then there's one more part for data interpretation, logical reasoning. These two require prep. Or some people can be inherently good at it too. I know people who wrote CAT 2 consecutive years without preparation, got 99.9 consistently, because they're inherently good at speed maths. Very
Yeah,
mathematical.
I know a few of those guys also. Guys, gals. Actually, I know one girl and two guys.
Yeah.
So hey, more power to them. For you, relatively compared to CAT in itself, it was the interview preparation. I don't think you were stressed out. I mean, or perhaps it wasn't the most difficult thing. I suppose the variation in the interview process and not knowing what to expect is something that may cause anxiety for anybody who's going to interview at IIMs. So